Susie Homesteader of the Rockies, and welcome to the Susie Homesteader channel. And hopefully you just watched my video that I did on spring cleaning, which talks about some little bigger issues than just your usual spring cleaning checkoff list. So what we'll talk about this time is another larger scale subject, and that's environmental hazards and toxins. Environmental hazards, they could be chemical, they could be biological, they could be physical. It could be something just like a radon gas in your area, or it could be a natural disaster. So environmental hazards change depending on where you live or what location you're in. Something I always suggest to people when they're buying land, or buying, land and or a house or some property, is to go down to the county or just do some of their homework and try and investigate what some of the possible toxins could be in their area. So even, these beautiful clean places out in the Rockies, like where we're located, also has some hazards that you don't think about. We had some asbestos toxins that got into some of the water systems in some other local areas up here. Uranium is a really high one in this part of the Rockies. And so therefore you have radon gases, and it might actually be getting trapped in your house or in your water. So there's things that, again, unless maybe you do your homework for the area that you live in, you might not know about. And they vary, from all kinds of crazy stuff. So it's not just, the air quality that you have in the area that you live in. There's also things that might live in your soil, in your water, and then, of course, your food, which comes from all over the world. So that's a very hard one to regulate in terms of what kind of hazards and toxins could be actually in your food supply. You also have invisible ones, again, like some of the other ones I just talked about, but things like radiation, even just the UV light that you get from the sun can be a hazard. Radiation from X-rays, X-ray machines, things that you don't see them, so you don't think about them. EMFs, which are also known as electromagnetic fields, that might occur when you live near towers, power stations, or power towers. So there's a lot to think about, depending on where you're already living or where you're choosing to live, and lots of things I really recommend that you do your research on and do your homework on, depending on what your situation is. As I said, there's lots of pollutants that we're all familiar with. And then, of course, natural disasters, depending on where you live, that you're probably aware of. That could be a possibility. And some of them are man-made, like I talked about, like with chemical and biological hazards that we've created all by ourselves as humans. And then, as I said, things that are just found in the air, the water, the soil, and your food. So a lot of different places that these things can be. The hardest one to calculate is certainly your food. We have red dyes, we have hormones, we have antibiotics that are put into animals that we're eating. Those are some of the things that are unavoidable unless you're buying organic food or you're raising your own food. And then, of course, anything that goes into the soil goes into your gardens or your orchards or whatever you may be even growing on your own. If you live near farmland and you're not even farming your own land, you still have the possibility of pesticides and fertilizers leaching into the ground and going into your water systems. So, like I said, the food one's a pretty tricky one to regulate. Even organic foods, if you're buying that, are not a perfect food because you have GMOs. You have all kinds of stuff that they're even doing with some of the better foods. So really, unless you're raising, growing, and supplying your own food products, even at that, it's pretty hard to regulate. You know, I have my own orchards, but yet I somehow have to find an organic bug spray, because if I don't use it on the fruit trees, then the fruit trees die. And then I don't have any fruit or orchards anyway. So there's just always something that we're changing with what we're starting with, and certainly just trying to be careful about what certainly the products that we're using are. Okay, so that talked about food, and then of course water. You know, I talked about getting your own private wells, or even your city or county wells tested, which you can get done. Get your water tested. You can also do your own test kit, which you can buy, you know, like at a hardware store or buy locally. And then in your water, you're looking for things like bacterias in particular, E. coli, Giardia. Again, I talked about that in my other video about spring cleaning. If you have livestock and pets and dogs, or you're ever leaving hoses in any of those water troughs or water bowls, there's bacteria backtracking from those animals right back into your well. So, you know, those are things where you can bleach your well if it's a private well, you know, on a 3 to 5 year schedule, and hopefully eliminate some of those bacterias. But, you know, certainly get your water tested wherever you are, and find out what's in there before you even start, because there's a lot more in water than you think. You know, I said pesticides and arsenic are a big one that you'll find in chemicals that you'll find in water. I have radon gases in the water where we live, because we have uranium in the bedrock and in the soil here, so there's a little radioactivity in this part of the Rockies. And there's certainly things that I can do to lessen that, which involves, you know, usually water filtration systems in your home or on your water system. You know, and also air filtration systems that you can set up, but that's a whole nother story. And then of course you also have heavy metals as we talked about, like uranium, you know, and mercury, which can certainly show up in your water table. So try and get your water tested. You know, and again, you can also do a at-home test kit for that. Soil, you know, of course, soil. God knows what's in the soil. Those can also be you can have your soil tested with a test kit, or you can take it down to your local city or county lab, and they will do it for you. You're still, again, very similar to water. You know, you're looking for heavy metals like mercuries and uraniums, toxins, fertilizers, oil spills that may have happened underground that saturate through your soil. You can have molds. You know, and biological issues like with sewage and raw sewage that seeps into some of the surrounding soil of where you live. And then there's still parasites. You know, there's ringworm that hides in soil, and all kinds of lovely things. So if you can get your soil tested, do that. And then, of course, you have your air. So that's another tough one, because there's a lot of air out there. You may live in a bigger city where you know for a fact there's smog and pollutants, and there's just not a lot you can do about that. I mean, in terms of changing the air quality, you can do things for yourself, like wear masks or you know, other things to help you breathe better. But you know, radon is another one that can come into the air. They do have tests that you can do to test the air in your house, particularly for radon. They have that one as well. That'll tell you the level of radon gas that you may have in the air, particularly in your house, which is where you're most concerned about that. You know, you have smoke. Out here in the Rockies, we have a lot of fires, a lot of forest fires. And then instead of smog, you have smoke pollution. And it's just bad air. And you have to wait till it blows away, or you got to wait until you know, it rains or snows to get rid of that. So, you know, when we have high forest fire seasons here, we have some pretty bad air quality. And again, those are things that you know, you don't have much control over. You know, molds are also airborne. So if you do have molds in your home, that's a really dangerous one, especially black mold, and they do have a test kit for that. Paint fumes, that's another biggie. Formaldehydes and other kinds of chemicals that they put in paints and stains, particularly exterior paints and stains. If you're using those indoors, can be very toxic, as well as for babies or pets, that are super sensitive to odors. So, I know I've used some exterior stains inside my home, but I had to have everything pretty well ventilated to be able to do that kind of stuff. So, if it suggests that it's an interior paint versus an exterior paint or stain, and you're doing it indoors, try and use the interior, because the fumes are way heavier on the exterior solutions. So those are just a few things, out of many that you'll find in terms of toxins in the air. And then, even on surfaces, going back to the paint thing, anything prior to 1978 has a very high possibility of having lead paint in it, which is super dangerous. So if you're buying some super old house or some historical landmark, all those things need to be tested for lead paint. And they do have a lead paint surface kit. And I talked about that in another video I did in terms of some building that I did with some old barnwood. And that talks about the lead paint danger as well. So, there's still toxins on the surfaces of things, particularly the paint. Cleaning solutions, boy, some of those, the ones they come out with now are super toxic. So if you're sensitive, again, to odors or smells or anything like that, be very careful about some of even your cleaning solutions that you're using. You might want to read the ingredients on the back of some of those products before you're buying them. And then, still, there's, again, back to the formaldehyde thing, OSB board, particle board, subflooring, sheathing, a lot of those products, building materials, absolutely have formaldehyde in them. So you can purchase chemical-free building materials, but they're very expensive. So if you are building, especially interior, with those products, try and get them covered as fast as you can with some kind of a wall covering or a floor covering. And then obviously don't have people exposed to those chemicals that come out of a lot of building products any longer than they have to be, especially kids. So building, a lot of new building materials will have chemicals in them that they're certainly not going to tell you about. And then, that's about it really, like I said, other than natural disasters, which you'll probably be pretty aware of, depending on where you live. Those are kind of some of the things you're going to be looking for. I think I mentioned it in my other video as well. ProLab is a company that does a lot of these at-home test kits. Just get on the internet and look it up, and they will tell you what various kits they have for different things, for testing for some of these toxins, mostly in your home. You're still looking for pollens and allergens as well, which is a little harder to test in terms of a kit. But there's lots of things, that you can do to avoid those things from getting worse. And I talk about that in several videos in terms of not having things in your home that will attract more of those allergens and pollens. And that would be linens and bedding, carpeting, any kind of a material that will hold on to those kind of allergens, which can, absolutely, and pollens, which can absolutely become a health hazard for a lot of people. So you have carbon monoxide when you're running a fireplace or gas stove. So it's a good idea to get a carbon monoxide unit put in if you're burning firewood anywhere inside your home, as well as a smoke detector. But carbon monoxide, ProLab does have a test for that as well. But it is a good idea to have a carbon monoxide detector as well. Asbestos is a really old building product that you'll still find in the walls of a lot of old homes. Long story, but I had purchased some buildings that were very old that I had to have tested for asbestos. And some of them came out that they did have asbestos in the walls, and some of them did not. So again, going back to how old certain buildings are, there's building materials from the past that we now know, like asbestos, that are very bad for you to breathe. So there's still things, like I said, from the past that pop up into the future here, especially, you know, like I said, older buildings in particular. And then, you know, you have parasites, which I talked about in my other video, which are not necessarily, you know, a hazard, but certainly something that can kill you. So parasites, you know, we're looking for chemicals, bacterias, molds, gases, as I said, allergens. You know, there's all kinds of great things out there, chemical and biological, that'll get you. So, you know, do yourself a favor and do a little bit of homework on the area that you live in, and, you know, take it outside the house and your surrounding areas. Like I said, if you live near a power station or some heavy crop areas, you know, farm areas, there's some things located there that you're probably not going to be able to avoid. So good luck in doing your homework, and I hope you, like I said, take some of the environmental hazards into consideration from where you're located. And if you have any more questions, come and see me on my website, Susie Homesteader of the Rockies, and I will see you there. Bye-bye. So, let's get started. Subscribe to the Susie Homesteader channel, and we'll see you there. Bye-bye.